you. Well, the financial health of Pennsylvania, like almost every other state, is precarious at the moment. And the underlying financial health of Pennsylvania families is equally precarious, both of them caused by the efforts that it's taken to fight this pandemic. Like a lot of states, we've managed to get through the current fiscal year, the one we're now in, by piecing together a lot of things that don't have second acts, including, by the way, and I want to say the early parts of the federal response here have been very helpful to us and to many states. But looking ahead to the budget that is almost upon us and looking at the enormous economic freefall that Pennsylvania families are experiencing, if Congress fails to act on a round of relief now, they're going to be risking much worse consequences ahead, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the nation and for turning the short-term recession into a long-term depression.
Well, I want to get some specifics from you, but I'd also like you to just respond. I mean, Senate Majority Leader McConnell, in addition to many other Republicans, some of who've joined us on air, when they talk about their unwillingness to give state and local relief, talk about inefficiency and waste, and actually use words as well that sort of imply a level of criminality to some of these states. I mean, I'm sure you've heard it. How do you respond?
Look, I have heard that in the so-called blue state bailout from Senator McConnell, and I have a couple of responses. Number one, that's the kind of talk, the sort of political talk out of Washington that causes folks out here in the real world, families who are struggling, to wonder what they're thinking. I don't represent a red state or a blue state. I represent Pennsylvania, and that's how this pandemic is not checking party registration or which state you live in. Number two, I've been as tough a fiscal watchdog as anyone here in Pennsylvania. And of course, all governments have their issues, but this issue, this pandemic, was not caused by anyone's inefficiency. It was entirely unpredicted, and it's affecting all of us equally. And look, number three, if Senator McConnell wants to be known as the guy who defunded the police around the country, standing in the way of state and local aid is a really good plan to do that. If what he wants to be known as is the guy who responded and prevented this recession from turning into a long-term depression, there is no better or more important thing to do than aid state and local governments. We know that from 2008. We know that from numerous academic studies. This is 15% of the U.S. economy we're talking about. So you can turn it into a political punching bag. That doesn't do a thing to help the American families who are, in addition to those who've lost a loved one to COVID, who are struggling with the economic consequences of it.
Joe, when I hear you talk about short-term recession to this heightened risk of a longer-term depression, I mean, those are some strong words you're using right there. Why specifically do you believe that this would actually roll into a depression if states and local governments aren't given more funding right now?
Well, I don't like no one else, maybe with the exception of your previous guest, Warren Buffett. I don't have a good crystal ball, but what I do know is this. In 2008, we aided almost every sector of the economy, but we neglected to aid state and local governments. And that was a drag, and it's acknowledged to be a drag, have been a drag on the economy for years longer than it needed to be. We also know, looking backwards, that states that were forced to cut their spending in the aftermath of the great financial crisis lost 1.5% of their private sector jobs. States that did not lose those jobs. So my argument is simple. That if we don't, and there are estimates out there that are more authoritative than any I can give you, including from Moody's, about the vast extent of, and it should be flexible aid to state and local governments to avoid having to cut first responders, having to make cuts in the healthcare system and the education system. If we don't do that, we are going to repeat that history in some fashion, whether that lasts 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. What is clear to me is it's entirely avoidable. This is not and should not be a political issue. That's why the National Association of State Treasurers that I'm a member of has endorsed state and local aid on a bipartisan basis. It's why you have governors as diverse as Andrew Cuomo and Asa Hutchinson saying this is a national problem and it demands a national and bipartisan solution. And this, again, I come back to what families here in Pennsylvania are experiencing, not just what we policymakers are looking at, which reflects what families are going through. And that's some incredible hard times. And again, to quote from Mr. Buffett, who preceded me, there is a legitimate cry for help here. I really hope Washington steps up and meets it, because if they don't, there are dire and deep consequences ahead.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.